I'd like to begin by sharing a beautiful paradox that has completely transformed my understanding of life and power. The great universal energy flows everywhere, to the left and to the right, embracing and nourishing all things without trying to control them. And when something wonderful is accomplished, this energy never says, look, the more you can relinquish control and trust others, the more truly powerful you become. But here's the beautiful paradox. You gain this power not by staying awake at night micromanaging everything, but by trusting others to carry things forward for you. Have you ever considered how magnificent it is that you can go to sleep at night and trust your nervous system to wake you up in the morning? You can even tell it, I want to wake up at 0. And just like an alarm clock, your body responds. Isn't that remarkable? This illustrates a profound principle. The way to become one with the universe isn't by trying to dominate it. That only creates separation and resistance. The path to oneness is through trust, through saying to the universe, let's see what you're going to do. But in saying this to everything outside yourself, you're also saying it to yourself. Because truly, do any of us know where our decisions really come from? They pop up like hiccups from a deeper place than our conscious mind. People experience tremendous anxiety about making decisions. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully. A farmer once hired a new helper and discovered this man was an extraordinarily efficient worker. On the first day, he assigned him to saw logs, and the worker completed more in one day than anyone had ever done before. It was absolutely remarkable. The next day, the farmer put him to work mending fences around the property, and by evening, every broken fence had been repaired perfectly. The farmer was amazed and wondered what to do with such an exceptional worker. So he took him down to the basement and said, look at all these potatoes from our harvest. I need you to sort them into 3 groups. Those will sell, those we'll use for planting next season, and those we'll discard. He left him to the task, but at the end of the day, the laborer approached him and said, I'm sorry, but I quit. Surprised? The farmer replied, you can't quit. I've never had such an excellent worker. I'll raise your salary, I'll do anything to keep you. But the laborer shook his head and said, no, chopping wood and mending fences is one thing, but this potato business, it's decision after decision after decision. Isn't that just like life? We worry. Did I think this through enough? Did I consider all the important factors? But if you really reflect on it, you'll realize you could never consider enough information. The data relevant to any significant decision is virtually infinite. So what do we actually do? We go through the motions of carefully analyzing options, but when the moment to act arrives, we make what amounts to a snap judgment. I'm being a bit playful here because certainly we sometimes grasp the outlines of situations and make reasonable decisions on rational grounds. But we conveniently forget all the variables that could have interfered with things working out well. It's amazing how often things do work out, but worriers are those who constantly think of all the variables beyond their control and everything that might go wrong. When you make a decision and it turns out, well, I believe very little of that has to do with your conscious control. You'll find that you can decide and manage things more harmoniously when you delegate authority rather than trying to maintain tight control. This is why truly great business leaders are those who can delegate effectively and trust others to work for them. They're developing their organizations on the same fundamental structure that governs living organisms. Delegation of their approach nurtures all things without dominating them. The more you let go and trust the process as if it were something separate from you, the more you realize the inseparable identity between self and other. If you try to discover the unity between self and other by subjecting other to self, that approach will fail. But if you find this unity by surrendering control to other and trusting the process, you might occasionally make mistakes or bad gambles, but in the long run, you're acting on a principle that has the backing of evolution itself. This is precisely how biological evolution unfolds through constant delegation of authority. It's why democracy is inherently superior to monarchy. As Alexis de Tocqueville observed, democracy is always right, even if for the wrong reasons, because operating within a democracy is what Buckminster Fuller called synergy, the intelligence of a highly complex system, the full nature of which remains unknown to any individual member. We're always entering new environments, but we never fully understand these new conditions because the only environments we truly know are the past ones. In the development of life, at any level, there's always a new form of organization emerging that's higher than any existing form, but we only become aware of it after it has already happened. Consider Thor Heyerdahl's famous Kon-Tiki expedition. He figured out a few basic principles about how to build a balsa wood raft to sail from South America to the Pacific Islands. But once he set his journey in motion, he discovered that all sorts of unexpected factors cooperated with him. When the wood became wet, it expanded so that the binding ropes bit deeper into it and held everything completely secure, something he never anticipated. As he sailed along, flying fish would conveniently land on the deck each morning, providing breakfast. All kinds of natural factors collaborated with his journey because he had aligned himself with the flow of nature. Everything cooperated with him because he had touched the key. He had made that act of faith, picking up on practices that had been developed centuries earlier by those with profound ecological awareness. From this way of thinking emerges something with enormously creative and revolutionary consequences versus it has become not out of virtue or self-sacrifice, but out of practical necessity, crucial to let go of trying to control everything, to give up the attempt to dominate every situation. Similarly, it has become, at this point in our human journey, very much a matter of practical necessity to learn how to enjoy ourselves genuinely. You could approach those with a rigid work ethic who resist this idea and say to them with a smile, it is your solemn duty to learn how to enjoy yourself. Why? Because in an age of increasing leisure and automation, people absolutely must know how to enjoy themselves authentically. If they don't, they risk unleashing destructive forces that could harm our collective future. So creating a more ideal world has become not some distant dream, but an urgent necessity. We simply can't do without it because if we try to, we risk terminating our existence through mutual blame and scapegoating. The current tendency to seek out new scapegoats, to fantasize about removing certain groups from power, all the bitter divisiveness of polarized politics. These approaches have become irrelevant and dangerous. We now have the opportunity to trust our own intelligence and technology to take the risk of moving toward what we truly want, which will work to the extent that we realize a fundamental truth. What I truly want at the deepest level is aligned with, and I don't know what you want. Surprise me. But that's the essence of the I-thou relationship, as Martin Buber would say. So when we return to the fundamental question we started with, what do I really want? The answer might surprise you. I don't know. When the great Zen master Bodhidharma was asked, who are you? Which is another form of the same question, he simply replied, I don't know. As the saying goes, planting flowers to which the butterflies come, Bodhidharma says, I know not. When you genuinely don't know what you want, you've reached what Eastern traditions call the state of desirelessness. But there's a beginning stage of not knowing and an advanced stage of not knowing, and they're entirely different. In the beginning stage, you don't know what you want simply because you haven't thought deeply about it, or you've only considered it superficially. Then comes the middle stage, when someone encourages you to think more carefully. You start saying, well, I think I'd like this, and I might enjoy that. And perhaps I want the other thing. This is the middle stage of knowing. But then you move beyond that and begin asking, is that what I really want? And in the end, you might say, no, I don't think that's really it. I might be satisfied with it temporarily, and I certainly wouldn't turn my nose up at it, but it's not really what I want at the deepest level. Why do you really know what you want? There are two profound reasons. Number one, you already have it. Number two, you don't truly know yourself because you never can completely know yourself. The divine essence within us is never an object of its own knowledge. A knife doesn't cut itself. Fire doesn't burn itself. Light doesn't illuminate itself. The divine is always an endless mystery to itself. This I don't know, uttered from the infinite interior of the spirit. This I don't know is the same as I love, I let go. I don't try to force or control. It's the same as genuine humility. And ancient Upanishads express this beautifully. If you think that you understand Brahman, you do not understand, and you have yet to be instructed further. If you know that you do not understand, then you truly understand. For the Brahman is unknown to those who know it and known to those who know it not. Anytime you voluntarily release control, in other words, cease clinging to yourself, you experience an excess of power. Why? Because you've been wasting tremendous energy in self-defense trying to manage circumstances, attempting to force things to conform to your will. The moment you stop doing that, all that previously wasted energy becomes available to you. In that sense, having that energy available means you are one with the divine principle. You have the energy. However, when you're trying to act as if you were God, not trusting anyone, playing the dictator, keeping everybody in line, you actually lose the divine energy because what you're doing is simply defending yourself and your ego. So here's the principle. The more you give it away, the more it comes back to you. Now you might say, I don't have the courage to give it away. I'm afraid. You can only overcome that fear by realizing you better give it away because there's no use holding on to it. The meaning behind the fact that everything is constantly dissolving, that we're all falling apart, that we're all in a process of constant change and transformation. What some might call death is that, as Omar Khayyam wrote, the worldly hope men set their hearts upon turns ashes, or it prospers, and like snow upon the desert's dusty face, lighting a little hour or two is gone. Spare expressed it magnificently in The Tempest. The cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack. Everything falling apart, everything changing, everything transforming. But here's the liberating truth. This is actually your greatest helper. The fact that everything is in a state of flux is your ally. It means you don't have to let go because there's nothing to hold on to in the first place. It's achieved for you by the process of nature itself. Once you truly understand that you don't have a chance at permanent control, that everything will eventually vanish and leave not a rack behind, and you fully embrace that reality, suddenly you discover you have tremendous power, this enormous access of energy. But it's not power that came to you because you grasped for it. It came in exactly the opposite way. And power that comes to you in that opposite way is power with which you can be trusted. What we're talking about isn't so much a set of ideas as an experience, or shall we say, experience this kind of conversation. In comparison with encounter groups or workshops or experiments in sensory awareness, might be called a conceptual seminar, although I'm not really talking about concepts. The crucial question is, a real feeling understanding of the relationship between the individual and the world is something that operates in your very bones, not just as a view or belief you hold intellectually. It's fascinating that the Western religious tradition emphasizes primarily right belief. Do you believe in the correct dogmas and doctrines? Only secondarily does it emphasize right action. In Christianity, particularly what you believe is far more important than what you do, because one is saved through faith, not by works. Early in its history, the Christian church rejected a movement known as Gnosticism, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. There were some sound reasons for doing so because the Gnostics tended toward anti-materialism. They divided human beings into three classes: pneumatic, spiritual, psychic, psychological, and hylek material, like the last term coming from the Greek hyle, meaning wood. So people were categorized as spiritual, psychological, or wooden, with the wooden people being those most absorbed in materiality and most closely identified with their physical bodies. Orthodox Christianity rejected this distinction because of the perfectly correct insight that material existence isn't inconsistent with spirituality. This is something many Christians have forgotten. Christians believe, as a central principle of their faith, in what's called the incarnation, that in Jesus of Nazareth, God actually became material, became human, and through this process initiated a transformation of the cosmos. As St. Athanasius beautifully expressed it, God became man, that man might become God. You don't hear that from the pulpit very often. The Christian church therefore emphasized pistis of faith over gnosis. Knowledge, because they said you can never fully know God intellectually. God could never become merely an object of knowledge. And in this roundabout way, Christian theologians were saying exactly the same thing as the Hindus. Only the Hindus call this realization of God through faith jnana, which is the same root as the Greek word gnosis. Just to give you a little sidelight on how words get mixed up in their meanings, we now have a term, agnostic, which generally means a person who doesn't commit to any beliefs about the ultimate nature of things. They simply say they don't know. But the original word agnosia in Greek meant a special kind of knowledge. It was called the dark knowledge of God, the knowledge of God in the cloud of unknowing, to use the title of a mystical treatise written by an anonymous 14th century English monk. This monk derived his ideas from a mysterious figure who wrote under the name Dionysius, the Areopagite. Dionysius was a 5th or 6th century Syrian monk who had learned his mysticism from Porphyry, who got it from Plotinus, a Neoplatonist who probably received significant inspiration from the intellectual world of Alexandria. Alexandria, in the early years of the Christian era, was a tremendous exchange place between East and West. Buddhist monks visited Alexandria. It was one of the great centers of trade between Rome and India. As you may know, much of Rome's gold eventually went to India for the purchase of pepper. As a result, the Roman economy was significantly impacted. They imported too many luxuries from India. India, in exchange, adopted elements of Roman architecture, which you can see in many Indian temples. Alexandria was a great center for the Gnostics and for Christian theology, home to some of the greatest theologians, Clement, Origen, Athanasius, St. Cyril, all worked from Alexandria. But returning to this remarkable monk Dionysius, it was he who first introduced to Christian circles the idea that there was such a thing as the knowledge of God by faith, by agnosia, really by unknowing. In his short book called Theologia Mystica, he wrote a treatise on the higher knowledge of God that in parts reads as if it could have been quoted directly from the Upanishads. The last section of it resembles the Mandukya Upanishad because it's a series of negations. It says what God is not. And he goes very far in this direction because he says God is not one. Our concept of unity falls far short of what God is. So does our concept of Trinity. So does our idea of spirit, our idea of mind, our idea of justice, our idea of love. All these concepts are not really God. He says in another place, if anybody having seen God understood what he had seen, what he would have seen would not have been God, but some creature of God, less than God, some sort of angel or something like that. It's remarkable to consider the influence this man had. Writing under the name of Dionysius, the Areopagite, he became identified with St. Paul's first convert in Athens. Legend has it that he was the first bishop of Athens and was martyred in Gaul, where he's known as Saint Denis. And Thomas Aquinas regarded the writings of Dionysius, the Areopagite, as having the highest authority. If all the texts of Dionysius's work had been lost, you could restore most of it from quotations in Thomas's writings. What we're seeking, because I want you to understand something essential, what we're seeking, what we all yearn for, whether we realize it or not, is a state of consciousness where we let go of control, where we recognize that the more we attempt to dominate and manipulate the world around us, the more we separate ourselves from our true source of power. The greatest spiritual teachers across time and traditions have pointed to this truth. It's not about accumulating more knowledge, wealth, or control. It's about surrendering to what is, about trusting the inherent intelligence of the universe, about recognizing that there's a wisdom infinitely greater than our individual minds at work in every moment. When you release your grip on life, when you stop forcing things to be the way you think they should be, that's when true power flows through you. That's when synchronicities begin happening. That's when life becomes magical, not because you're controlling it, but precisely because you've stopped trying to control it. I invite you to experiment with letting go today. Release your tight grip on the steering wheel of life and see what happens. You might be amazed at how much more smoothly the journey unfolds when you stop trying to direct every twist. And let me tell you something that changed my life profoundly. For years, I was what you might call a control enthusiast. I had my 5-year plans, my daily schedules, my carefully organized systems. I believed that success came through having everything under control. Then one day, through a series of what seemed like unfortunate events, everything fell apart. A major project collapsed, a relationship ended, and some health challenges emerged all at once. For the first time in my adult life, I couldn't control my circumstances. I had to surrender. And in that surrender, I discovered something remarkable. When I stopped fighting against what was happening and simply allowed life to unfold, solutions appeared that were far better than anything I could have engineered. Opportunities emerged that I couldn't have imagined. And a deep peace replaced my constant anxiety. This doesn't mean I became passive. There's a world of difference between surrendering and giving up. Surrendering means you stop fighting against reality. You accept what is, and then you work with it rather than against it. It's like the difference between trying to swim upstream against a powerful current versus allowing that same current to carry you while you simply guide your direction. I believe we're in a time when this wisdom is more crucial than ever. Our world is changing at an unprecedented rate. The old structures and systems are breaking down and new ones are emerging. In this time of transition, those who cling rigidly to control will suffer tremendously. Now, while those who can flow with change while maintaining their center will not just survive, they'll thrive. Let's talk about how this principle applies in our everyday relationships. Think about a time when you tried to control someone else, perhaps your spouse, your child, a friend, or a coworker. How did that work out? If you're honest, you'll probably admit it created tension, resistance, and distance. We resist being controlled. It's human nature. Yet, we continuously try to control others. Instead, try an experiment. In your next interaction with someone, completely let go of any need to control the outcome. Be fully present, express yourself honestly, and then allow the other person to respond however they will. Don't try to manage their reaction or manipulate the situation. Just be there, open and receptive to what you'll likely discover is that when you release the need to control, the interaction flows more naturally. There's more authenticity, more connection, and surprisingly, things often work out better than if you had tried to control them. This applies not just to relationships, but to all areas of life. Consider your work or creative endeavors. When you're tightly controlling the process, forcing outcomes, you're actually cutting yourself off from the flow of inspiration and intuition that comes from a deeper source. I remember working with a brilliant writer who was experiencing severe writer's block. She was trying to force her novel to conform to a detailed outline she'd created, but the words wouldn't come. I suggested she try something different. To put aside her outline temporarily and simply show up at the page each day with an attitude of curiosity, asking her characters what wants to happen today, rather than imposing her will on the story. She allowed the story to reveal itself to her. The result was remarkable. Not only did her writer's block dissolve, but the story took turns that were far more interesting and compelling than what she had originally planned. By letting go of control, she accessed a deeper creativity that couldn't emerge when she was forcing the process. The same principle applies to how we approach challenges and problems. When we're fixated on a specific solution, insisting that things must work out exactly as we've envisioned, we close ourselves off to alternative possibilities that might be even better. I worked with a man who had his heart set on a particular job. He'd applied multiple times and been rejected. He was frustrated and angry, convinced that this specific position was the only path to fulfillment. When we explored what he really wanted, not the job itself, but what the job represented to him: creative expression, financial security, making a difference. He was able to release his attachment to that particular position. Within weeks of this shift, a different opportunity appeared that fulfilled all his deeper desires, but in a way he hadn't anticipated. Had he remained fixated on controlling the outcome, insisting on that one job, he would have missed the better option that was waiting for him. Now, I want to address something important. When I talk about letting go of control, I'm not suggesting we become passive or fatalistic. I'm not saying we shouldn't have goals or take action toward what matters to us. There's a paradox here. We're most effective when we hold clear intentions while simultaneously releasing attachment to exactly how those intentions manifest. It's like planting a garden. You select the seeds carefully, prepare the soil, provide water and nutrients, but you don't stand over the seeds commanding them to grow in a particular way. You create the conditions for growth, and then trust the inherent intelligence within the seed and the larger natural processes. This is how we can approach our lives with clear intention and devoted action while simultaneously trusting in a wisdom greater than our individual minds. Plant your seeds with care, tend them with love, but then have the wisdom to step back and allow. There's another aspect of letting go of control that's profoundly important. It allows us to be present in this moment, which is the only moment we ever actually have. When we're caught in the grip of trying to control everything, our minds are constantly racing to the future or dwelling in the past. We miss the extraordinary gift of now. For just 1 minute, completely let go of trying to control anything. Don't try to control your thoughts, your feelings, your circumstances. Just be fully present with what is, without judgment or resistance. What do you notice? There's a spaciousness there, isn't there? A sense of peace that exists beneath the surface turbulence of life. This moment free from the need to control is always available to us. It's our natural state, though we've largely forgotten it. The great wisdom traditions have various names for it: presence, mindfulness, awareness. But they all point to the same reality. When we release control, we discover that we are held in something much larger than our individual selves. I'm reminded of a story about a holy man who was known for his state of perpetual joy. One day, a curious visitor asked him, "What is your secret? How do you maintain such peace and happiness in a world filled with suffering and uncertainty?" The holy man smiled and replied, "I have no secret. I simply discovered that I am not in charge of the universe, and I found that to be an enormous relief." This simple wisdom points to a profound truth. Much of our suffering comes from the mistaken belief that we should be in control, that we must manage everything. When we release this impossible burden, we discover a freedom and joy that... Now, as with all deep truths, this one has a shadow side when misunderstood. Some people here let go of control and interpret it as an excuse for irresponsibility or passivity. They use spiritual-sounding language to justify inaction or avoidance of necessary changes. That's not what I'm talking about at all. Letting go of control doesn't mean abandoning responsibility for your life or avoiding difficult choices. In fact, it often requires tremendous courage to release control, far more courage than clinging to the illusion that you can manage everything. True surrender isn't about giving up on life, but engaging with it more fully. It's about recognizing the difference between what you can influence and what you can't, and focusing your energy where it can be most effective. It's about acting from a place of wisdom rather than fear. This brings us to another important aspect of letting go of control. It allows us to experience genuine love. Think about it. You can't control someone and truly love them at the same time. Control is rooted in trust. When we release our need to control others, we create the space for authentic connection. I've seen this play out countless times in family relationships. Parents who try to control every aspect of their children's lives often find themselves in constant power struggles with relationships characterized by resistance and resentment. But parents who can provide guidance and boundaries while allowing their children the freedom to make their own choices and learn from their own mistakes tend to develop relationships based on mutual respect and genuine closeness. The same principle applies in romantic relationships, friendships, and work relationships. Control constricts. Trust expands. Control creates resistance. Trust creates flow. Control is based on the fear of what might happen. Trust is based on faith in what is possible. I'd like to share a personal practice that has helped me tremendously in letting go of control. Each morning, I begin my day with a simple declaration. I surrender this day to a wisdom greater than my own. I trust that whatever happens today is part of a larger pattern that is working for my highest good, even if I can't see how at the moment. This isn't a magical formula that makes everything go smoothly. Challenges still arise. Unexpected events still occur. But this daily surrender creates a foundation of trust that helps me respond to whatever happens from a place of centeredness rather than reactivity. It reminds me that I don't have to figure everything out or manage every detail. I simply need to show up fully for each moment and respond with the wisdom that arises naturally when I'm not caught in the grip of control. Now let's explore how this principle of letting go of control relates to our spiritual journey. Every authentic spiritual tradition, at its core, points to the same essential truth. What we call enlightenment, awakening, or salvation involves a fundamental surrender of the separate self with all its controlling strategies. In Christianity, Jesus says, whoever tries to keep their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life will preserve it. In Buddhism, the path to liberation involves releasing attachment and recognizing the illusory nature of the separate self. In Hinduism, moksha or liberation comes when we recognize our essential oneness with Brahman, the absolute reality. In Taoism, freedom comes through aligning with the Tao, the natural flow of life, rather than resisting it. All these traditions, though they use different language and frameworks, are pointing to the same fundamental shift from living from the ego self that tries to control everything to living from an awareness of our connection to something infinitely larger than our individual selves. This shift doesn't usually happen all at once. For most of us, it's a gradual process of learning to let go, of discovering through our own experience that surrender leads not to loss, but to a greater fullness of life. We learn to trust the process one small step at a time. I remember working with a woman who was going through a devastating divorce. She had spent months fighting the reality of her situation, caught in anger, blame, and desperate attempts to control the outcome. When she finally reached a point of complete exhaustion, she said to me, I can't do this anymore, I give up. That surrender became her turning point. Not because she became passive or stopped taking necessary practical steps, but because she released the internal struggle against reality. From that place of acceptance, she found the clarity and energy to rebuild her life in a way that eventually led to greater joy and fulfillment than she had known in her marriage. Her experience illustrates a paradox that mystics have pointed to for centuries. True freedom comes not from unlimited choice and control, but from surrender to what is. In that surrender, we discover that we're held in something much larger than our individual will, something that has our ultimate well-being at heart. This doesn't mean we never make choices or take action. It means that our choices and actions arise from a different place, not from the contracted ego self desperately trying to control outcomes, but from a deeper wisdom that emerges when we're aligned with the larger flow of life. In practical terms, how do we cultivate this capacity to let go of control and trust the process of life? Here are a few practices I've found helpful. First, develop the witness consciousness, the ability to observe your own thoughts, emotions, and actions without being completely identified with them. When you notice yourself trying to control a situation or person, simply observe that tendency with compassion rather than judgment. This creates a tiny but crucial space between the impulse to control and acting on that impulse. Second, practice accepting reality exactly as it is, even as you work to change things for the better. The paradox is that genuine change becomes possible only when we fully accept what is. Resistance to reality creates tension and actually blocks. Acceptance creates a clear space from which wise action can emerge. Third, look for evidence in your own life of how things have worked out when you've been able to let go. Most of us can identify situations where our best efforts to control produced frustration and failure, while surrender led to unexpected positive outcomes. Remembering these experiences builds trust in the process. Fourth, connect regularly with something larger than yourself, whether through nature, spiritual practice, art, service to others, or whatever opens your heart and puts your individual concerns in perspective. This connection reminds us that we're part of something vast and complex that we can't possibly control, but that we can trust. Finally, practice presence. The present moment is the only place where life actually happens, and it's also the only place where we can experience the peace that comes from letting go of control. When you find yourself worrying about the future or regretting the past, gently bring your attention back to now. Ask yourself, what needs my attention in this moment? Then respond to that with your full presence. These practices aren't about achieving some perfect state of perpetual surrender. They're about cultivating a different relationship with life, one based on trust rather than fear, on collaboration rather than control, on flowing with rather than fighting against. The journey of letting go of control is ultimately the journey of discovering our true nature. When we release the contracted identity of the separate self that needs to control everything, we begin to experience ourselves as expressions of the same intelligence that moves the stars and grows the flowers. We discover that we are not separate from the universe, but integral expressions of it. From this perspective, letting go of control isn't about becoming helpless or passive. It's about aligning ourselves with the immense creative power that flows through all things. It's about becoming channels for that power, rather than believing we are its source. I believe we're living in a time when this wisdom is especially needed. Our world faces enormous challenges that cannot be solved from the same level of consciousness that created them. The mindset of control and domination that has characterized much of human history has brought us to a critical juncture. The way forward will emerge not from more sophisticated strategies of control, but from a fundamental shift in consciousness, from separation to connection, from domination to partnership, from fear to trust. This shift begins with each of us, in the small daily moments when we choose to let go of control and trust the deeper wisdom of life. Every time we make this choice, we contribute to the larger transformation that our world so desperately needs. As we come to the close of our time together, I want to leave you with this thought. You are not separate from the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself in human form. When you let go of trying to control everything from the limited perspective of the separate self, you open yourself to the infinite wisdom and creativity that is your true nature. The great paradox is that when you surrender control, you don't become powerless. You become connected to a power so vast and intelligent that your small, controlling strategies seem almost comical by comparison. This is the power that grows the forests, moves the oceans, and spins the galaxies. And it's the same power that beats your heart breath.